Summit Hollow, Colorado. There's a wildness in the air that's older than the town itself. In late July, the annual livestock fair rolls into town with a dust cloud fanfare, banners whipping in the wind, battered pickup trucks crammed into every empty field, families in faded flannel shirts making their way toward the clamor of the main arena. The town itself seems to pulse with energy, a place where secrets hide behind weathered doors and gossip travels faster than the mountain winds. The main attraction this year, everyone knows, isn't the chili cook-off or the blue ribbon pie contest. It's the arrival of Blaze. Word spread weeks ago, a chestnut Mustang with a jagged white blaze down his nose, untamed, unbroken, and notorious for smashing 2 steel gates in 1 week. Some say he's not just wild, but cursed. Old-timers whisper that his spirit can't be tamed, that he runs with ghosts when the moon is high. The crowd packs the grandstands early, boots thumping on the wooden bleachers. Kids with sticky fingers crane over the rails, and a cluster of men in Stetsons swap bets in low, eager tones. Dust curls in the sunlight. In the center of it all, pacing like a storm cloud with legs, is Blaze. He snorts, eyes rolling, muscles bunching under a coat so slick it seems to throw off sparks in the afternoon sun. On a raised platform beside the arena, Silas Keaton, Summit Hollow's richest rancher, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, his boots shining like black oil, takes the microphone. His smile is sharp, practiced. The crowd hushes as he lifts his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Summit County Fair's main event," he booms, voice echoing across the grounds. "What you see here is no ordinary horse. This is Blaze, the wildest Mustang west of the Divide. He's bucked off every cowboy, smashed every fence. And today," Silas lets the silence hang, "I offer you all a challenge. Tame Blaze in 5 minutes, and you'll walk away with $1 million. Fail, and you'll owe me $10,000. A ripple of disbelief runs through the crowd. Cameras flash. Silas grins wider. He loves this. Attention, spectacle, power. Trainers and wranglers start lining up, each one sizing up Blaze and nervously cracking knuckles. The first trainer, a barrel-chested man with a braided whip, steps forward. He enters the ring with a confident swagger. Blaze snorts once, then explodes. Hooves kicking up dirt, charging the man so fast he dives over the rails and lands face first in a puddle of spilled cola. The crowd roars with laughter. Silas's smile doesn't waver. The next tries sweet talk and a sugar cube. Blaze pins his ears, lunges, and the trainer sprints out, limping and red-faced. Another, lean and wiry, boasting of old-school cowboy tricks, lasts exactly 23 seconds before Blaze backs him into the corner, snorting like a freight train. The minutes pass, each challenger leaving faster and more humiliated than the last. Some folks start to drift away, bored or disappointed. Others stay, transfixed by the spectacle, wondering if anyone will even try again. And then, out of nowhere, a hush falls over the crowd. At the very edge of the arena, a boy steps forward. 13, maybe 14, skinny as a fence rail. His jeans patched and too short at the ankles. His name is Eli Granger. He moves with a quiet, almost hesitant confidence, not making eye contact with anyone in the stands. He's clutching something in his hand, a battered harmonica. It's silver, dulled by years of use. People start to whisper, some with pity, some with irritation. "That Granger kid? What's he doing here? Where's his family? He'll get himself killed." But Eli doesn't seem to hear them. He takes a deep breath, dust swirling around his sneakers, and steps into the ring. Silas's voice rings out, edged with mockery. "Son, you got 10 grand to spare?" Eli says nothing. He just looks at Blaze, eyes wide but steady. The Mustang stops pacing, nostrils flaring, as if sensing something new. A silence spreads, deep and electric. For a moment, even the wind seems to pause. Eli lifts the harmonica to his lips. The first note is thin, almost lost in the air, but it grows, trembling with memory and hope. The tune is simple, gentle, a song meant for campfires and quiet nights. Nothing you'd ever hear at a rodeo. It's the song his father used to play, before everything burned. Blaze's ears twitch. He stops dead, one hoof suspended in midair. His head tilts, and he lowers it. eyes locked on the boy. The crowd leans in, breath held. No one moves. Eli keeps playing, fingers steady even as his heart pounds in his chest. The Mustang steps forward, slow and careful, each movement cautious but drawn by something he can't resist. There's no rope, no whip, just music and the endless silence of the ring. For a moment, Eli feels the world fall away, the weight of his loss, the ache of missing his parents, the constant hum of people who don't understand. Here, with Blaze, there's only music. Blaze sniffs the air, then stretches his neck, coming closer still. Eli lowers the harmonica and meets the Mustang's gaze. Their breaths mingle, hot and visible, in the dusty afternoon sun. The tension is so thick, it seems to press against everyone's skin. A single bystander, stunned, lifts their phone and begins filming. No one speaks, no one dares. After a long, trembling moment, Blaze nudges Eli's hand, warm and surprisingly gentle. A gasp ripples through the stands, then another, building into something like awe. Even Silas looks stunned, the microphone forgotten in his hand. Eli raises the harmonica once more, and Blaze, wild, feared, untamable Blaze, takes a step and then another, following the song. And for the first time all day, the crowd is utterly, completely silent. Every small town has its own whispered stories about tragedy, and in Summit Hollow, few are repeated with more somber voices than the tale of Eli Granger. He hadn't always been the quiet kid standing on the edge of crowds. Before the fire, before his world caved in, Eli had been a boy who laughed loud, chased his father through pine thickets, and learned every river bend in the valley. But grief can hollow out a person until all that's left is silence. The house fire had come one bitter December night, a freak accident with a wood stove, the authorities said. Eli didn't remember much, just smoke, confusion, shouts, and the piercing sound of a harmonica, played by his father as flames clawed at the roof. Later, when he woke in the hospital, the harmonica was on his bedside table, its once shiny metal blackened at the edges but still whole. His father was gone. His mother, too, lost years earlier to illness. That left Eli and the harmonica in a silence so deep it pressed in from every direction. Afterward, Eli moved in with his Aunt Marianne, his father's younger sister. She was a nurse, good-hearted but always tired. Her small house perched on the edge of town with laundry strung between sagging posts. She tried her best, giving Eli a room of his own, homemade meals, gentle reminders that he was safe. But the boy she took in barely spoke, barely smiled, and never played his harmonica, at least not where anyone could hear. Instead, Eli roamed. After school, he would disappear into the woods, harmonica tucked in his pocket, boots scuffing through pine needles. Sometimes he sat by the creek for hours, just listening. Water tumbling over stone, the distant whistle of a train, the endless hush of wind. The harmonica would come out only when he was sure he was alone. He played the songs his father taught him, melodies made of longing and memory, tunes that seemed to stitch together the torn places inside him. And that summer, Aunt Marian signed him up for the youth fair, hoping maybe he'd make friends or find something to love again. Eli didn't protest, just nodded, the harmonica resting like a secret in his hand. At the fair, he drifted among the crowds, eyes drawn to the livestock more than the people. He watched horses being paraded and patted, their flanks gleaming, their handlers strutting with pride. Most kids tried to impress the judges, showing off tricks or talking fast about lineage and training. Eli, though, just watched, looking past the noise to the way the horses flicked their ears, the way they breathed, how they responded to a touch or a whisper. The day of the challenge, Eli had come to the arena because he'd heard Blaze was trouble. Even from outside the gates, the Mustang's presence was unmistakable, a living bundle of fury and fear. While others laughed or jeered, Eli felt something different, recognition. Blaze was alone, scared, misunderstood. Maybe it was foolish, but in that moment, Eli felt a connection, a kind of silent kinship only those who've lost everything can recognize. Standing at the edge of the ring, Eli's fingers had trembled over the harmonica. He remembered his father's words. A real musician doesn't play for applause, Eli. He plays for the truth in the song. As each trainer failed and the crowd's excitement curdled into ridicule, Eli had been swept forward, almost without thinking, until suddenly he was in the ring, all eyes on him, the harmonica a lifeline between what was and what might be. Inside the ring, the world changed. Eli became aware of the dust in his nose, the heat of the sun, the wild look in Blaze's eyes. The Mustang was panting, sweating, flanks heaving from exertion and terror. For a heartbeat, Eli almost turned back. Then he thought of his father's gentle hands, the soft way he'd murmur to frightened animals, the belief that calm and music could reach places that words never could. He played. The first note was shaky, but the melody flowed, carried by memory and longing. The crowd melted away. It was just him and Blaze and the song. Eli played softly, drawing out the notes his father used to play at night, the same ones that soothed him through thunderstorms and sadness. Blaze's ears flicked. The horse stopped his frantic pacing and faced Eli, nostrils flaring, listening. Eli's heart hammered, but he didn't look away. He kept playing, letting the tune wind through the dust and sunlight. He remembered the way his father would lean close and say, "Sometimes the wild things aren't looking to be broken, son. They're looking to be understood." The song was slow, steady, a promise that he meant no harm. Blaze took a step forward, then another. Hooves barely making a sound. The crowd's hush deepened, disbelief warring with awe. Someone's phone glinted in the sunlight as they filmed, but Eli didn't notice. He watched the horse's body language, head low, ears forward, tension easing out of the powerful shoulders. The harmonica's notes lingered, and Blaze moved closer, drawn by the music and the absence of fear. Eli remembered nights by the fire, his father telling him how animals sense intention, how music is just another kind of language, older than words, deeper than fear. When the harmonica finally fell silent, Blaze stood before Eli, eyes soft, breath slow, a gentle nose nudge, a small gesture, but to Eli it felt like a miracle. He reached out a trembling hand and let the Mustang's breath warm his skin. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, slowly, the spell broke. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting that it was a trick. Eli didn't flinch. He tucked the harmonica into his pocket and walked to the gate, Blaze following a few steps behind. Silas Keaton's face was a mask of disbelief and anger, but Eli barely noticed. He just kept walking, the harmonica warm in his hand, knowing that something had shifted, not just in the ring, but in himself. Back outside the arena, Eli's aunt ran to him, arms wide. He let her hug him, her tears soaking his shirt. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not just by the crowd or by Blaze, but by the part of himself he thought had vanished with the fire. Unbeknownst to Eli, the video shot by the bystander was already climbing toward 1 million views, but in that moment, none of that mattered. He had played the music. The wild had listened, and somewhere, deep inside, Eli Granger found his own silence beginning to lift. It started with a shaky phone video posted online before the dust in the arena had even settled. In Summit Hollow, news usually spread from porch to porch, neighbor to neighbor. But now, with the tap of a finger, a single moment could circle the globe before anyone even finished their coffee. The video caught it all. The wild Mustang, frozen by music, a boy in faded jeans and an old flannel, the hush that swept through the crowd as something impossible happened right before their eyes. It wasn't just a clip of a horse and a kid. It was a glimpse of hope, of wonder, of a miracle no one could explain. Within hours, the video was everywhere. By the time Eli and Aunt Marion got home from the fairgrounds, there were already hundreds of comments. Is this real? How did he do it? Someone give this kid a record deal. Some people called it magic. Others insisted it was a trick, editing, or some kind of setup by the fair organizers. But the views kept climbing. 10,000, or then 50,000, then 100,000. Before midnight, Aunt Marion, who had never even used Instagram, found her phone buzzing with messages from friends and strangers alike. Eli's classmates, some of whom hadn't spoken to him in months, suddenly flooded his DMs with wide-eyed emojis and awkward congratulations. Teachers at school, pulled him aside to ask about the Mustang thing. Even the principal called him to the office, not to scold, but to shake his hand and tell him, "You made this whole town proud, Eli." But as the video's popularity skyrocketed, so did the pressure. News vans rolled into Summit Hollow, their satellite dishes glittering like weird metal mushrooms in the parking lot. The morning after the fair, Eli woke to find a camera crew waiting outside the house. A young woman in a crisp blazer and perfect hair waving at him from the sidewalk. "Eli Granger," she called, voice too bright. "Can we ask you a few questions about Blaze?" Eli, blinking and stunned, retreated inside while Aunt Marion handled the reporters, her smile tight as she shooed them away. For the next week, Summit Hollow was never quiet. Reporters came and went, each one hungry for the story. The boy who tamed fire, they called him, playing off Blaze's wild reputation and the tragedy in Eli's past. Cameras followed him to school, to the grocery store, even to the little church at the end of Main Street. Eli didn't know how to say no, so mostly he just stood there, mute and uncomfortable, clutching his harmonica like a talisman. Every question felt the same. How did you do it? What were you feeling in the ring? Did you know Blaze would listen to you? He answered as simply as he could, his voice quiet, never telling them about his father or the pain behind the music. Some people loved him for it. The little local paper ran a glowing article, "Hometown Hero" or "Horse Whisperer." Families who had lost hope or felt invisible saw something in Eli's story, a promise that miracles still happened, that broken things could be mended. One night, Aunt Marion found a stack of letters in their mailbox, handwritten notes from strangers across the country, some even from as far as Canada. Each letter told a little story. A child who finally spoke after months of silence. An old man who played harmonica for the first time since his wife passed. A family who rescued a stray dog and named him Blaze. But not everyone was happy. In the big ranch house at the edge of town, Silas Keaton seethed. He watched the news clips, jaw clenched, as the world's attention shifted from him, the powerful, untouchable rancher, to a skinny orphan with a dented harmonica. At first, Silas tried to laugh it off. A kid with a flute and a horse with no sense, he scoffed to his friends at the steakhouse. But as the video's views passed 1 million, his tone changed. His name was barely mentioned in the interviews. All the money he'd put into the fair, all the work to make Blaze the centerpiece, and it was slipping away. Stolen by a nobody. He needed someone to blame. Silas called his lawyer, a slick man from Denver who specialized in fixing embarrassing problems for men with too much pride. "This whole thing's a setup," Silas growled over the phone. "No way that kid did that alone. That horse must have been trained ahead of time. Hell, maybe they drugged it." The lawyer, smelling a fat retainer, promised to dig up dirt. "Don't worry, Mr. Keaton," he assured. "We'll make sure the truth comes out." It wasn't enough. Silas started talking to anyone who would listen. At the feed store, at church, even at the local bar. "You all know that horse ain't right," he'd say, voice pitched low for drama. "That Granger kid, he's got people helping him, pulling tricks behind the scenes. This is fraud, plain and simple." Some folks nodded along. Others, weary of Silas's power, just shrugged and looked away. A few nights later, Silas showed up at Aunt Marion's house, his Cadillac crunching on the gravel driveway. He didn't bother knocking, just stood in the yard, calling out, "We need to talk, Marion." Eli, peeking through the curtains, saw his aunt's spine stiffen as she stepped outside. Their voices floated in through the open window. "Let the boy have his moment," Marion said, her tone flat, but unafraid. "He's not, hurting anyone." "It's about fairness," Silas replied, his voice oily. "If he's cheating, people need to know. And if you're helping him, well, that wouldn't look good, would it?" "He's not cheating," Marion shot back. "You saw what everyone else saw. Maybe you just don't like losing." Silas's answer was lost in the night wind. He left soon after, but his shadow lingered long after his taillights disappeared. The pressure mounted. Anonymous emails arrived at the local school board, suggesting Eli be drug tested or suspended. Someone slashed Aunt Marion's car tires one night, though she never reported it. At the grocery store, a few people turned away as Eli passed, whispering behind cupped hands. Others stood a little taller when they saw him, ready to defend the boy they now called our own. Through it all, Eli clung to what mattered. Blaze. Each afternoon, he walked to the pasture, where the mustang was kept, the harmonica in his pocket, hope flickering in his chest. Together, boy and horse retreated from the world's noise into a silent understanding only they shared. When Eli played, Blaze listened, and for a few precious moments, the weight of judgment and gossip faded, replaced by the wild promise of trust. But in the shadows, Silas Keaton was not finished. He was gathering every tool he had, lawyers, threats, and secrets, and preparing for a battle that would test not just Eli, but the very soul of Summit Hollow. Summit Hollow's nights fell softly, with the scent of sage and old timber drifting through the window screens. But in the Granger house, there were nights when sleep wouldn't come. Nights Eli spent staring at the ceiling, the ache of recent days twisting in his chest. Fame had crashed into his life like a summer thunderstorm, all noise and blinding flashes. The fairground's roar had faded, replaced by the pressure of prying eyes, suspicion, and Silas Keaton's shadow hanging over everything. On one of those restless nights after Aunt Marion had fallen asleep over her paperwork at the kitchen table, Eli crept upstairs to the attic. The stairs groaned under his weight, the old house whispering secrets in every crack. He'd never liked the attic. It was filled with boxes stacked high, forgotten trunks, and the ghosts of memories that still hurt too much to touch. But something drew him up that night, a sense that the answer to everything, the horse, the music, even the pain, might be buried up there. The attic was chilly, the only light a sliver of moon through a dusty window. Eli pushed past boxes of Christmas decorations, his father's old work boots, a broken rocking chair. In the farthest corner, half buried under a blanket and a stack of faded maps, he found a wooden chest. He recognized it at once, carved with pine trees and a running horse, stained with age. It had belonged to his father, locked since before the fire. His hands trembled as he brushed off the dust. The lock was rusted, but Eli's small fingers pried it open. Inside, the air smelled like cedar, old paper, and a faint trace of pipe tobacco. His father's scent. At the top lay a stack of battered field journals, leather covers soft from years of handling. There were other things, too. A tin cup, a hunting knife, a faded photograph of Eli as a toddler perched on his father's shoulders, both grinning at the camera, the forest all around them, but it was the journals that called to him. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, Eli cracked the first one open, heart thumping as his father's handwriting came alive beneath his fingertips. July 8, 2005. Saw a yearling today, trapped by the fence line. Terrified but smart. No sudden moves, just patience. Sat with her, hummed a little. Let her come to me. Page after page. The journals were filled with stories, rescues, long nights in the mountains, injured animals soothed back to health. But most surprising were the notes. Diagrams of horse body language, charts of ear position and tail flicks, careful observations about scent and breathing and the way a horse's eye changes when it starts to trust. It was nothing like the books Eli had seen at school, all about breaking and training by force. His father's way was quieter, older. A sentence caught Eli's eye. Horses don't learn from fear. They learn from quiet. Listen before you speak. Don't teach them to obey. Teach them it's safe to be themselves. He read on, swept into memories of forest trails and morning mist, the silent communication between man and animal. There were sketches of wild mustangs, notes about every horse his father had helped, their scars, their habits, the little victories that took weeks to earn, and then, tucked into the back, a folded sheet, his father's songbook. Written in the margins, Music calms them. Rhythm tells them you're steady. Heartbeat, breath, tune, trust flows in patterns they can feel. Eli pressed the sheet to his chest, tears welling as a piece of his father returned to him. All this time, he thought his father was teaching him about music, about how to fill the woods with song. But the truth was so much deeper. Every lesson was about trust, about seeing past fear, about never forcing your will onto something wild and hurting. He stayed up there until the first rays of dawn crept through the window, reading and rereading, absorbing every scrap of wisdom. As the house stirred, awake below, Eli tucked the journals under his arm and slipped back to his room. He hid them beneath his bed, a secret and a promise. That morning, the world felt a little different. At breakfast, Aunt Marion studied Eli's face, searching for signs of trouble or hope. He smiled, small but real. And for the first time, she saw light instead of the shadow of loss. Over the next few days, Eli carried the journals everywhere, poring over them at lunch, after school, whenever he could find a few quiet minutes. He began to notice things he'd missed before, the way Blaze's ears flicked back and forth, how he shifted his weight before deciding to trust, the subtle language of muscle and breath. When Eli played his harmonica now, he adjusted the rhythm to match Blaze's slow exhale, finding a calm that settled over them both like a blanket. At the pasture, he tried out what he learned. No ropes, no commands, just silent patience, waiting for Blaze to come on his own. Sometimes it took hours. Other days it happened so quickly it felt like magic. Blaze would approach, touch his nose to Eli's palm, and stand there, steady as stone, while the boy hummed a tune just for him. One afternoon, as Eli sat cross-legged in the grass with Blaze grazing nearby, a group of local kids watched from the fence, curiosity outweighing their usual shyness. They whispered about horse whispering and magic tricks. But Eli just smiled and kept reading his father's notes, letting the silence speak for itself. The tension with Silas Keaton, however, didn't fade. If anything, the rancher's suspicions deepened. His men rode past the pasture more often, eyes sharp, muttering about witchcraft and cheating. Eli ignored them as best he could, burying himself in the work of learning, of truly understanding what his father had left behind. One evening, after a long, golden day spent with Blaze, Eli wrote in his own notebook, "Dad never taught me to break horses. He taught me how not to break them. He taught me to listen, to wait, to trust the silence. The grief didn't vanish. The doubts and fear still lingered at the edges. But for the first time since the fire, Eli felt anchored, connected to his past and to something larger than his own pain. At dinner, Aunt Marion asked quietly, "What are you working on, honey?" Eli hesitated, then slid one of his father's journals across the table. "Just learning what Dad wanted me to know." Marion's eyes filled with tears, but she only squeezed his hand, holding tight. He'd be proud of you. I hope you know that." That night, as he lay in bed, the moon painting silver patterns on the ceiling, Eli let himself believe it. In the silence, in the song, in the trust he was building with Blaze, he could almost hear his father's voice, low and steady, telling him he was exactly where he needed to be. The winds in Summit Hollow changed as August rolled in, carrying both the scent of wildflowers and something new, curiosity. The town that once gossiped about Eli Granger now watched him with careful, uncertain interest. At first, he was the quiet kid who'd done the impossible, but as days passed and the media glare faded, Eli found himself more alone than ever with Blaze. Yet it was in that quiet that things began to shift, both within and around him. Every day after school, Eli hurried straight to the pasture, where Blaze now grazed under the watchful eye of Aunt Marion. The mustang still spooked at sudden sounds, still whirled at a raised hand or the metallic glint of a rope, but the old wildness had softened, replaced by a cautious sort of curiosity. Eli read his father's journals in the grass, whispering field notes as if reciting sacred scripture, and slowly began to turn what he'd learned into practice, At first, it was just Eli and Blaze, boy and horse, student and teacher. Eli stopped bringing treats or using tricks. He learned to stand still, breathe slow, and wait until Blaze's ear would flick toward him, that subtle invitation that meant the horse was ready to listen. Some afternoons, they just sat together in silence, the harmonica silent, letting trust grow at its own stubborn pace. But soon, their little world began to widen. The first to join them was Dr. Morales, the local veterinarian. She'd seen the video online, like everyone else, but kept her opinions to herself. One cool morning, she appeared at the pasture fence with a thermos of coffee and a battered veterinary bag slung over her shoulder. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her tone gentle, eyes sharp with the kind of knowing only years of animal care can bring. Eli hesitated. He was used to being watched, but rarely helped. Still, he nodded, and Dr. Morales climbed through the gate with careful movements, settling herself quietly on the grass. She didn't ask questions or make suggestions. Instead, she just watched, taking notes in a tiny spiral-bound pad as Blaze snorted and pawed at the ground. "You've got a gift, Eli," she said quietly after an hour. "But even gifts need guidance. Horses remember more than we do. If you want help, I'll be around." Eli found himself nodding, surprised by the rush of gratitude. Having someone on his side, someone who understood animals, not just headlines, felt like finding a compass in the fog. Word traveled, as it always does in small towns. A few days later, an old red truck rattled up to the pasture, belching smoke and country music. Out stepped Nellie Darnell, retired rodeo champion, and the kind of woman who wore spurs on her boots even at the grocery store. She walked with a limp from a bad fall years back, but her voice still cracked like a whip. "Heard you're starting a revolution, kid," she said with a grin, planting her fists on her hips. "Mind if I watch?" Eli had seen Nellie at rodeos, always surrounded by admirers. Now, with her faded hat pulled low, she was just another horse lover, curious and maybe a little lonely. She set up a folding chair outside the fence, and like Dr. Morales, she watched more than she talked. It wasn't long before the pasture became a kind of after-school gathering spot. A pair of twins from Eli's class, Sam and Maddie, wandered by with their skateboards, drawn by rumors of the Mustang Whisperer. They didn't say much at first. Sam fiddled with his phone, Maddie chewed her sleeve, but they stayed, leaning on the rails, faces pressed close as Blaze circled Eli in the grass. Soon, the unlikely team began to take shape. Dr. Morales offered advice, sometimes patching up Blaze's old wounds or teaching Eli about calming nerves with gentle hands and low voices. Nellie, in her gruff way, demonstrated how to move with the horse instead of against him, letting her body become part of the rhythm instead of the force. The twins fetched supplies, read passages from the journals aloud, and sometimes, when Eli was too frustrated to speak, just sat with him in silence. Eli learned the power of rhythm and stillness, of letting Blaze lead instead of pushing him forward. He experimented with the harmonica, matching tunes to Blaze's breathing, watching how the horse responded to soft, steady music. There were setbacks, days when Blaze shied away from everyone, when progress seemed to vanish overnight, when old wounds flared and trust frayed at the edges. But the team never lost patience. Each small victory, Blaze lowering his head, stepping closer, letting Eli run a brush through his mane, became a celebration. The town started to notice. The local paper ran a story called "The Granger Way." Can stillness tame the wild? The article was short but respectful, describing how Eli and his growing group of helpers worked quietly each afternoon, never using whips or harsh words, never forcing the horse into anything he wasn't ready for. A photo accompanied the story, Eli kneeling in the grass, harmonica in his hand, Blaze standing just behind him, ears pricked forward with interest. At the diner, talk shifted. Some folks were skeptical. Old ranchers muttered about hippie tricks and the dangers of letting kids get too close to wild animals. But others were quietly impressed, parents who had seen their children struggle to fit in, Teachers who knew Eli's story, people who remembered the day Blaze broke 2 steel gates and nearly tore down the arena. They all watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Aunt Marion supported Eli in every way she could, keeping the house warm and welcoming for the rotating cast of helpers. She watched her nephew bloom, his laughter returning, the slump in his shoulders easing as he found not just a project, but a purpose. Still, challenges remained. Silas Keaton, whose money and influence reached into every corner of the county, kept a wary eye on Eli's progress. His men drove by the pasture with increasing frequency, sometimes stopping to glare or snap photos, other times simply revving their engines and leaving deep ruts in the dirt as a warning. But even as Keaton's shadow lingered, the Granger way took root, one step at a time. The team practiced patience and trust, never rushing, always listening. Some evenings, Blaze would trot right up to Eli and nudge his pocket for the harmonica. Other times, he would simply stand nearby, ears flicking as Eli read his father's notes aloud. As the summer sun dipped lower each evening and the grass turned gold in the twilight, Eli knew something was changing, not just in Blaze, but in himself, his friends, and maybe even in Summit Hollow. They were building something together, a team, a new way, and, most precious of all, a trust that even the wildest heart might someday call home. Summer was winding down in Summit Hollow, the days growing shorter, the wind tinged with the first hints of autumn. For Eli Granger, every day felt urgent. The county fair was only a week away, and with it, a promise. One more chance to prove that trust could tame the wild, that music and patience could heal even the deepest scars. Eli's team had settled into a rhythm. Dr. Morales' gentle guidance, Nellie's stories, and tough love, the twins' relentless energy. Blaze was changing too. He greeted Eli at the fence every morning, nuzzling his hand, letting him brush out tangles in his mane. Some afternoons, the whole group sat in the field as Blaze lay down in the grass nearby, a gesture so rare in wild horses that Dr. Morales teared up the first time she saw it. But with each victory came a shadow. Silas Keaton's men circled more often, sometimes watching from the ridge with binoculars, sometimes tossing careless threats about putting things back the way they belong. One evening, Nellie caught a stranger standing by the pasture gate, pretending to fix his truck, but clearly watching the horses. Eli tried to ignore it, but a knot of anxiety twisted inside him. His father's journals warned, "When you challenge old ways, expect pushback from those who profit most." On Thursday night, a storm blew through Summit Hollow, rattling the windows and shaking loose branches from the cottonwoods. Rain hammered the roof as Eli lay awake, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Aunt Marion slept fitfully. The whole house seemed restless. When the storm passed and dawn crept over the horizon, Eli threw on his jacket and hurried out, boots squelching in the muddy yard. At first he thought the pasture was empty because of the rain. Then he saw the gate, hanging crooked, the chain bolt cut clean through. Fence wires dangled where they'd been sliced. Tire tracks carved deep ruts in the soft earth, leading out towards the ridge road. Eli's breath caught in his throat. The other horses were still there, nervous and crowding together, but Blaze's spot by the old cottonwood was empty. The harmonica in Eli's pocket felt suddenly unbearably heavy. He ran, heart pounding, searching every inch of the field and the woods beyond, calling for Blaze until his voice cracked. Nothing but silence answered. At the gate, Aunt Marion joined him, her face pale with shock. "He's gone," Eli said, voice hoarse. "They took him." She examined the cut fencing, the tire tracks, the broken gate. This wasn't just a prank, Eli. Someone planned this? Nellie and Dr. Morales arrived soon after, having heard from the twins about the missing Mustang. Dr. Morales crouched by the tracks, examining a faint mark, a cigarette butt ground into the mud, the brand expensive and unfamiliar. "No way this was random," she said grimly. "Keaton's boys have been circling for weeks." Eli's hands shook as he clutched the harmonica. Anger burned in his chest, hot and useless. Why? Why would they do this? Nellie's eyes were hard as flint. Blaze is the only thing standing between Keaton and his pride. He thinks if he takes the horse, he takes your chance to show the world what you can do. That's how men like him operate. Control, threats, taking what isn't theirs. Eli felt the world closing in, every hope he'd built collapsing in a heap. "It's over," he whispered, voice barely audible. "He's gone. There's nothing we can do." Aunt Marion knelt beside him, one arm around his shoulders. "Listen to me, Eli. I know this hurts, but you haven't lost everything. You've got us. You've got the truth your dad taught you, and you've got that music. You can't silence someone who's already found their song." He shook his head, tears hot on his cheeks. "What if it's not enough? What if I was just, lucky? Maybe they were right. Maybe Blaze was never really mine to help." As she took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "Luck doesn't build trust, Eli. You did. Blaze listened because you saw him, really saw him. Not as a trophy, not as a test, but as a soul who needed kindness. That's rare, honey. That's powerful. And no one can take that away from you. Not Keaton, not anyone." The day passed in a fog of phone calls, police reports, and long silences. The sheriff took notes, promising to look into it. But Eli could see in his eyes the resignation of a man who'd tangled with Keaton's influence before. Dr. Morales called in favors, asking ranchers to keep an eye out for a wild mustang with a jagged blaze. The twins posted on social media, rallying classmates to spread the word. Nellie checked in on old rodeo friends who sometimes heard things others didn't. But as the sun dipped below the ridge, hope faded with the light. That evening, Eli sat on the porch steps, staring at the empty field. He turned the harmonica over in his hands, tracing the dents and scratches. His mind spun with what-ifs and memories. His father's steady voice, Blaze's soft breath, the rhythm they'd built together. He remembered a passage from the journal, one he'd nearly skipped. "When trust is broken, don't run. Sit in the silence. Let grief teach you what pride never could." For the first time since the fire, Eli allowed himself to cry. Long, racking sobs that emptied out the anger and left behind only sorrow. The world seemed too big, the shadows too long, his dreams slipping away like water through his fingers. Aunt Marion came out quietly and sat beside him, letting the silence stretch. When he calmed, she handed him a mug of tea and spoke in a voice soft as dusk. "I know it feels hopeless, but you're not alone in this, Eli. And your dad taught you to listen, to wait. Maybe that's what you need to do now. Listen for the trail. Wait for the moment to act. We'll find Blaze. And when we do, you'll show everyone, including Keaton, what the Granger way really means." Her words settled over him, not as a command, but as an invitation. For a long time, Eli sat in the cooling air, the harmonica resting on his knee, the taste of loss mingling with the stubborn ember of hope. Inside, the phone rang. A friend of Nellie's had spotted a trailer on the old logging road, moving fast toward the abandoned feedlot north of town. It wasn't proof, but it was something. And Eli's heart kicked in his chest. Maybe the fight wasn't over. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. He slipped the harmonica into his pocket, stood and looked out at the stars prickling the sky. Somewhere out there, Blaze was waiting. Not just to be found, but to be rescued by the only person who truly understood him. Eli squared his shoulders, the ache inside now sharpened into determination. Tomorrow, the search would begin. Night fell heavy and thick across Summit Hollow, pressing down with a silence so absolute that even the usual cricket song seemed to vanish. For Eli Granger, that silence was both comfort and torment. It echoed his own heart, empty in places, filled with fear in others, yet somehow holding a promise that if he listened closely, he might hear what others missed. He couldn't sleep, not with Blaze gone, not with the weight of the day smothering any hope of rest. Aunt Marion's words circled in his mind, mingling with lines from his father's journals and the scent of old cedar from the attic. Listen for the trail. Wait for the moment to act. But how did you listen for a horse lost in darkness, stolen by men who'd rather see him broken than free? Eli's room glowed faintly with lamplight as he pored over the journals again, looking for anything that might help him find Blaze. He remembered the stories his father told about wild horses, about how they returned to familiar plowes when frightened, about the invisible threads that tied them to certain patches of land, old feedlots, and secret watering holes. The answers were there if he could only find them. He closed his eyes, breathing slow, recalling every moment he'd spent with Blaze, the pattern of his hoofbeats, the rhythm of his breath, the way he always drifted toward the old feedlot north of town when spooked by thunder or sirens. That place was a graveyard for old farm equipment and broken dreams. A crumbling barn, empty troughs, fence posts that leaned like tired sentinels in the moonlight. It wasn't safe, but it was familiar. If Blaze had been taken by force, maybe he'd try to get back there. Or maybe the men who took him would hide him in a place no one bothered to look anymore. A soft knock came at his door. Aunt Marion stood in the hallway, dressed in jeans and an old flannel, her hair pulled back in a tight braid. "You're not going to bed, are you?" she asked, a tired smile on her lips. Eli shook his head. "I have to look for him. Tonight, I can't wait for the sheriff or the morning or anything." She nodded. "Then let's do this right. Dr. Morales is already on her way. Nellie, too, and the twins are coming with flashlights in their dad's pickup. If you have any idea where to start, now's the time." Eli's heart pounded as he grabbed the journals, the harmonica, and pulled on his boots. Outside, headlights cut the dark, Dr. Morales in her old Subaru, Nellie in a rattling truck, the twins tumbling out of the back seat, all wide eyes and determination. They gathered in a circle, breath misting in the cool air. Eli spoke quietly. "The old feedlot, north of town. That's where I'd look if I were Blaze. Or if I wanted to hide a horse no one wants found." Nellie slapped her hat down, a gleam of fierce pride in her eyes. "You heard the man. Let's move." The search party set out, headlights bouncing along rutted back roads, flashlights sweeping over fields where shadows moved and coyote eyes flashed green. Eli rode with Dr. Morales, silent except for the hum of tires on gravel. He kept his hand on the harmonica, feeling its weight, willing it to guide him like it always did. At the edge of the feedlot, they killed their lights and climbed out, moving slow, staying low. The place was colder than Eli remembered, haunted by rusted machinery and the bones of old dreams. They spread out, each person searching for clues, hoofprints in the mud, fresh hay scattered by nervous hands, a broken fence post with horsehair snagged on the wood. Eli found himself drawn to the barn, its roof caved in on one side, the big double doors hanging crooked. Inside, darkness swallowed every sound except his own breathing. He pressed closer, listening for the one thing no thief could hide, the sound of a frightened horse. Then he heard it, a sharp whinny, muffled but unmistakable, followed by the low murmur of men's voices. Eli's blood turned to ice. He motioned to the others, and they crept forward, hearts hammering in their chests. Through a crack in the boards, Eli saw Blaze, sweaty, sides heaving, eyes wide with panic. 3 men circled him, trying to corner him with ropes and curses. One of them, big, heavy-set, with a face hidden in shadow, raised a whip. Blaze reared, hooves flailing, but the men only laughed. Eli acted without thinking. He pulled out the harmonica, steadied his breath, and blew a single, trembling note. It wavered in the night air, soft at first, then rising into a tune full of longing, and memory. The barn seemed to hold its breath. Blaze froze, ears swiveling towards the music. For a moment, everything stopped. The men's hands, the angry shouts, even the dust swirling in the moonbeams. Eli stepped into the open, flashlights behind him illuminating his small figure. "Stop!" he shouted, voice cracking with fear and determination. The men turned, startled. One hissed, "It's the kid," and dropped his rope. The biggest one stepped forward, whip in hand, face ugly with anger. "You little punk," he snarled. "Go home. This horse don't belong to you." Eli didn't flinch. He lifted the harmonica again, heart pounding, and played his father's song, the one Blaze knew best. It was a lullaby for broken things, a promise of safety, a plea for trust. Blaze's panic melted. The Mustang lowered his head, his muscles unclenching, and began to walk, slowly, step by step, toward Eli. The men cursed, trying to cut him off, but Blaze dodged them, never taking his eyes from the boy. Each note seemed to build a bridge across the gulf of fear. Behind Eli, the others spread out. Dr. Morales called the sheriff. Nellie picked up a rusted shovel and brandished it with a wild glint in her eye. The twins filmed everything, their hands shaking but determined. The big man lunged at Eli, but Blaze placed himself between them, teeth bared, hooves ready. For a moment, the man hesitated, seeing the fire in the horse's eyes. He spat in the dirt and backed off, muttering threats, but the moment was broken with one last trembling note. Eli ended the song. Blaze nudged him gently, warm breath on his cheek, and Eli wrapped his arms around the Mustang's neck, tears streaming down his face. The team closed ranks around them, forming a wall against the men who'd tried to take what could never be theirs. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The men scattered into the night, leaving behind only threats and the stink of fear. Dr. Morales hugged Eli tight. Nellie slapped him on the back, and the twins whooped with relief. Eli whispered into Blaze's ear, "We're going home, buddy. You're safe now." As they led Blaze out into the moonlight, every step felt like the first breath after drowning. The darkness had tested them, but they'd found each other, boy, horse, and team, guided by music, memory, and the promise of trust. The Summit County Fair dawned clear and sharp, the kind of morning when the mountains seemed to glow and every sound rang out twice as loud as usual. For Eli, the day felt unreal, like waking in the middle of a dream you half expected to vanish with the sun. But it was no dream. The search for Blaze had ended in triumph, but the aftermath was still raw. Bruises on his arms from a night in the feedlot, tear tracks on Aunt Marian's cheeks, a heaviness in his chest that no amount of sleep could lift. He hadn't let Blaze out of his sight, not for a single minute. That morning, they walked the fairgrounds together, side by side, boy and Mustang, both marked by recent scars, both a little wild, both impossibly determined. The county fair was the biggest event Summit Hollow ever saw. Crowds poured in from towns all over, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Flags snapped in the morning wind. Cattle bellowed from distant pens. The smell of fried dough and wood smoke drifted over the parking lots, jammed with trucks and battered minivans. But even among the chaos, everyone knew what the real main event would be. The final challenge in the center ring. Silas Keaton arrived late, making a show of it. His limousine gleamed beneath banners, and his entourage, security, lawyers, a PR team, cleared the way. The townsfolk stared, some with admiration, many with wariness. Keaton wore a sharp suit, a white hat, and a grin stretched thin and cold. His own stallion, Titan, a black show horse with a bridle heavy with silver, pranced and snorted as if he sensed his master's tension. Eli stood outside the ring with his team. Dr. Morales, Nellie, the twins, Aunt Marian, watching Keaton parade Titan for the cameras. The show was everything Keaton stood for. Control, power, money. Titan's coat gleamed. Every movement had been drilled into him with force and repetition. As Keaton circled, he threw glances at Eli, a warning in every flick of his eyes. The rules were simple. Each contestant would have 10 minutes in the ring. Keaton would perform first, followed by Eli and Blaze. The crowd packed the stands, excitement and skepticism crackling in the air. Some had come to see a miracle, others expected a disaster. When Keaton's name was called, the announcer's voice boomed from the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, your host and benefactor, Mr. Silas Keaton." The applause was polite, but not thunderous. Keaton smiled, tipping his hat. Titan moved in perfect circles, executing every command with mechanical precision. Keaton showed off spins, stops, sharp pivots, the silver of the bit flashing in the morning sun. To some, it was impressive. To others, it was just noise, an expensive trick, soulless and cold. Then came Eli's turn. He stepped into the dust, Blaze at his side, no saddle, no bridle, just a halter for safety. The crowd quieted. Some people held their breath, waiting for a disaster. Eli took a slow breath, his harmonica cold in his hand. He remembered every lesson from his father, every word from the journals, every moment of fear and hope that had brought him here. He remembered how Blaze had chosen to trust him when no one else would. He looked at his team at the fence. Nellie gave him a thumbs up. Dr. Morales nodded encouragement. The twins grinned with pride. Aunt Marian's eyes were bright with tears, but her smile never wavered. The ring was his. Eli paused, looked at Blaze, and nodded. The Mustang's ears flicked. He stepped forward, steady and calm. Eli lifted the harmonica. The first note shivered through the air, as soft as breath, winding through the hush. Blaze stilled, his eyes fixed on the boy. The tune Eli chose was simple, a lullaby and a promise, built on trust and hope. As the melody grew, Blaze began to move, not with the stiffness of a trained horse, but with fluid, unforced grace. He trotted a circle around Eli, head low, every step in sync with the music. The crowd didn't clap. They barely breathed. Eli played on, guiding Blaze with nothing but the rise and fall of his song. Blaze circled, then bowed, then reared, not in fear, but in joy, hooves churning artism, mane flying. He danced, he paused, he turned, all with the gentlest cues, a tilt of the head, a pause in the tune, a smile from Eli. A hush fell so deep you could hear the wind snap the flags above the stands. For a long moment, Eli and Blaze stood in the center of the ring, wrapped in their own world. Then Eli ended the song. The last note lingered, trembling, and Blaze walked to him, pressing his nose into Eli's palm. Silence held. No one moved. Then, slowly, a single clap echoed through the stands. A child, maybe 5 years old, standing on his seat with wide eyes. Another clap, and then another. The applause grew, building from scattered hope into a wave of awe. People rose, hats in hand, not cheering, but applauding, soft and stunned. The kind of ovation that means something real has happened, something none of them quite understand. Keaton stood at the gate, frozen. His face was a mask. Anger, disbelief, a flicker of something like fear. He said nothing as Eli walked Blaze to the fence. The judges huddled, whispering, but even they couldn't hide their wonder. As Eli left the ring, a news reporter shoved a microphone at him. "How did you do it?" she demanded. "What's your secret?" Eli shook his head. He glanced at Blaze, and then at his father's old harmonica. "There's no secret," he said quietly. "Just trust, just listening." His team swarmed him. Nellie bear-hugged him. The twins danced around. Dr. Morales wiped her eyes. Aunt Marian held him close, whispering, "I knew you could do it." For the rest of the fair, the ring felt different. People spoke in lower voices, giving Eli and Blaze a wide berth, as if afraid to break the spell. Titan stood off to the side, head lowered, Keaton barely holding his composure. The competition faded to background noise. The only thing anyone remembered was the boy with the harmonica and the wild Mustang who listened. Eli and his team lingered by the rail, taking in the moment. For once, the world seemed to meet them with wonder instead of suspicion. The fairground, usually so loud, was wrapped in the soft magic of silence and song. That night, as fireworks lit the sky and cheers rang out over Summit Hollow, Eli sat with Blaze under the stars. He played his father's song again, this time for no one but them. A tune carried on the wind, a thank you, a promise. Blaze lay down in the grass, head resting against Eli's knee. And in that perfect silence, Eli knew they had already won in every way that mattered. The memory of the performance lingered in the fairground air long after Eli and Blaze had left the ring. For many, it was all they could talk about. The way a boy, with nothing but a harmonica, had tamed a wild horse with trust alone. Yet, as the sun slid lower, painting the distant ridges golden pink, a different sort of tension crept over the grounds. The crowd buzzed, wound tight with excitement and nerves, for there was still more competition left in the day. Keaton lingered near the judge's booth, his mouth drawn tight, hands clenched behind his back. Titan, his grand stallion, stomped the dirt, glossy coat dark as midnight. Keaton's supporters huddled close, muttering that the judges had been dazzled by a trick, that a child's circus act couldn't be allowed to upstage a real horseman. But the applause for Eli had planted doubt even in their hearts. On the far side of the arena, Blaze stood, calm and proud. Eli leaned against the fence, his hand resting on Blaze's shoulder, harmonica tucked away for now. His team gathered around him, their faces alive with pride and relief. In the ring, another competitor prepared for his turn. A tall man from downstate with a reputation for speed and flair. His horse, a young sorrel named Ginger, pranced nervously at the gate, wide-eyed and skittish, rattled by the energy of the crowd and the strange smells of fair day. The man mounted with practiced ease, waving to the stands as the announcer called his name. What happened next would haunt Summit Hollow for years to come. The competitor began his routine, trotting Ginger in tight circles, urging her into quick pivots and stops. But Ginger was not ready for the noise. The blast of a loudspeaker, the snap of a flag, the sudden crash of a dropped metal bucket from a careless worker just outside the arena. The sound startled Ginger. She bolted, eyes rolling white, tearing away from her rider's grip. The man tried to hold on, spurring her harder, but panic took hold. Ginger charged around the ring, hooves thundering, the rider barely clinging to the saddle. The crowd gasped as Ginger barreled toward the gate, where just beyond the rails a small child stood frozen, separated from her parents by only a few feet of open air. Time seemed to slow. Eli saw the danger first. He didn't shout, didn't think. He vaulted the fence, calling to Blaze with nothing but instinct, a gesture, a look. The mustang reacted instantly, following Eli without hesitation into the ring, their bond tested in the most urgent way. The panicked horse charged toward the gate. The child's mother screamed, reaching desperately for her daughter, but the distance was too great. Ginger, wild with terror, could not see the little girl, only the chaos, the shapes, the desperate faces. The crowd rose in a wave, some trying to jump the fence, others frozen in place. Blaze galloped across the ring, Eli sprinting alongside, his breath ragged, fear twisting inside him. But he didn't falter. He trusted Blaze, and Blaze trusted him. As Ginger veered toward the child, Blaze cut her off, placing himself between the runaway and the gate, his body a living shield. For a moment, the two horses faced each other, nostrils flaring, muscles trembling. Blaze made no move to fight or flee. He simply lowered his head, stepping forward, calm and steady, eyes fixed on Ginger. He exhaled a deep, slow breath, the kind Eli had practiced with him for weeks. He nudged the frantic horse's shoulder, just as Eli had once done for him, a touch full of reassurance. Ginger shuddered, her panic faltering. The rider slipped from the saddle, falling into the dust, but no one cared. All eyes were on the horses. Blaze stood firm, his presence anchoring Ginger, who slowed, then stopped, trembling but safe. Eli scooped the child into his arms, shielding her as Blaze herded Ginger gently away from the gate. Dr. Morales and Nellie rushed over, one tending to the girl, the other steadying Ginger's rider. The girl's mother, in tears, pulled her daughter close, whispering thanks over and over. The crowd erupted, not in polite applause, but in a wild, grateful cheer that rang across the fairgrounds. People leapt to their feet, hats waving, tears streaming down faces both young and old. Some called out Eli's name. Others simply stood, stunned by what they had seen. A wild mustang risking himself to protect the innocent, a boy's courage matching the trust he had built. The judges conferred, their deliberations forgotten as they watched the aftermath unfold. Even Keaton could not hide his shock. He stared at Blaze, at Eli, at the crowd's thunderous ovation. For the first time, his confidence faltered. He stood rigid, his supporters silent behind him. Slowly, Keaton walked into the ring. His boots left deep prints in the dust. He paused beside Eli and Blaze, searching for words. The silence that followed was heavy with history. Old wounds, old pride, the stubborn roots of a community divided by money and tradition. Keaton took off his hat. His voice was rough, quieter than anyone expected. "You did something no one else could, son. I tried to break that horse. You taught him to trust. He clapped, just once, a slow, echoing sound. It was not the applause of a showman, but of a man who understood, finally, what had been proven. One by one, others joined in. First Nellie, then Dr. Morales, then everyone in the stands, until the air was full of applause and tears and the wild hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. Eli wrapped his arms around Blaze's neck, burying his face in the horse's mane. The mustang stood quietly, his heart steady, the chaos of the day falling away. Later, as the sun sank behind the mountains, the judges announced their decision. "Today we witnessed not just a contest, but a miracle of trust," the head judge said. "Eli, Granger, and Blaze, you've shown us what's possible when we listen more than we command, when we offer trust before seeking obedience. The grand prize belongs to you." The crowd cheered again, louder than before. Keaton nodded, his shoulders sagging, then turned and left the ring, his pride broken, but his spirit, perhaps, set on a new path. As dusk settled over Summit Hollow, Eli and Blaze stood in the center of the ring, surrounded by friends, family, and strangers who now saw them not as a boy and a wild horse, but as a team, unbreakable and true. The fairgrounds buzzed with a new kind of energy, one built not on spectacle or power, but on the quiet, unshakable force of trust. And in that golden hour, Eli finally felt whole. A month passed, and the dust of the fair settled, but the story of Eli, Granger, and Blaze continued to ripple through Summit Hollow and far beyond. The video of the wild mustang shielding a child went viral, carried from phone to phone, screen to screen. News crews returned, this time more respectful, telling not just the story of a miraculous performance, but of a boy who changed an entire town's way of seeing. For the first time, Eli felt the world slow down and breathe. There were no more reporters camped outside his home, no more whispered doubts at school. Instead, he found new letters in the mailbox each week, children drawing pictures of Blaze, and parents sharing stories of quiet, frightened kids who wanted to learn how to trust too. The harmonica, once just a talisman of grief, was now a symbol, a reminder that music, patience, and listening could heal things words never could. Keaton disappeared from public view in the days after the fair, but not out of bitterness. The rumors trickled in quietly. The powerful rancher had suffered a minor stroke. For the first time, he was forced to accept help from others, to slow down, to face what he had lost. Not just a contest, but his connection to the community, to the land, and maybe to himself. One cool September morning, as leaves turned golden and the first flocks of geese soared south, a stranger arrived at Aunt Marion's house. He wore jeans and a faded work shirt, a limp visible in his step. It was Keaton, thinner and grayer, holding a deed in a weathered envelope. Aunt Marion met him at the porch. "Silas?" He managed a weak smile. "I want to make things right, Marion. I never saw what your nephew was doing. What he gave this town. I can't take back what I did, but maybe I can help now." She listened, arms crossed, skeptical but open. "What are you thinking?" Keaton held out the envelope. 20 acres, my old north pasture. I want Eli to have it. For the horses, for whatever he dreams up. No strings attached. Maybe some fires burn down what we need to lose. Maybe the rest clears a path. Aunt Marion called Eli to the porch, and together they heard Keaton's offer. Eli studied the man's face. It saw the cracks in the old armor, the wounds that went deeper than pride. Eli nodded. "Thank you," he said, and the handshake that followed felt like the true ending to their story of rivalry and loss. With the land secured, Eli's world shifted again. The team that had grown in the fields. The twins, Nellie, Dr. Morales, and Aunt Marion, gathered with him in the tall grass, looking out over the stretch of meadows and the old barns Keaton had let fall into ruin. "What now?" Maddie asked, twirling a blade of grass in her fingers. Eli smiled, the first easy smile in months. "Now we build something better." And so, the Granger Way Foundation was born. They worked through the autumn and into winter, scrubbing out the barns, repairing fences, and painting the sign that would welcome new faces. It was a sanctuary, but an not just for wild mustangs like Blaze. It became a place for anyone who needed to heal. Kids who had lost parents, families torn by grief, children struggling to find their voice, horses rescued from auctions, and neglect found a second chance here, their stories woven with those of the people who cared for them. The opening day of the Granger Way Foundation was cold but clear. The local paper sent a photographer. Teachers brought their classes. The sheriff cut the ribbon, and Keaton, walking slowly but with his head high, stood beside Eli, his presence a quiet apology. Blaze stood at the center of it all, calm and proud, the once wild mustang who taught everyone that the truest strength comes from trust, not force. Workshops began. Nellie teaching kids to move with horses, not against them. Dr. Morales explaining the language of ears, eyes, and breath. Aunt Marion organizing support circles for grieving families. Eli, older now, in ways words couldn't capture, led groups through the pastures, harmonica in his pocket, inviting them to listen first. To the wind, to the horses, to each other. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, he'd play a tune, and kids who hadn't spoken in weeks would find the courage to hum along. Blaze's legend grew. He became the heart of the sanctuary, a teacher, a friend, a symbol of all that could be made whole. When a new foal was born in the spring, Eli named her Hope. The foal trotted after Blaze, and Eli everywhere, clumsy and bold, her arrival a reminder that new beginnings were always possible, even after the worst storms. The Granger Way Foundation attracted visitors from far and wide, experts in animal therapy, parents seeking help for shy or hurting kids, ranchers curious about this quiet revolution. Some scoffed at first, but after a few afternoons spent in the fields, watching the horses move and the children open up, even skeptics found themselves changed. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the mountains glowed blue, Eli walked the ridge with Blaze and Hope at his side. The grass rustled, the air alive with the song of crickets and the distant laughter from the barn. Eli paused, harmonica in hand, and played the melody his father had once used to quiet his own fears. A song of promise, of letting go, of trusting that the path ahead was worth walking. He looked down at the foundation, where children played and horses grazed, and felt a peace he'd never known before. Aunt Marion joined him, her arms slipping around his shoulders. "You did it, Eli," she said, her voice thick with pride. "You made something beautiful out of all that pain." Eli nodded, tears bright in his eyes, but smiling through them. "Dad always said some fires destroy, others clear the way for something new. Maybe we needed both." That night, as darkness fell, the community gathered in the barn for a celebration. Eli stood at the center, Blaze on one side, Hope on the other. He spoke, not loudly, but clearly. "You don't have to be loud to be heard," he said. "Real power isn't about control. It's about connection. Sometimes the wild doesn't need taming. It just needs someone to trust." He played the last song, and the barn was filled with voices, laughter, and hope. The closing note hung in the air, a promise carried on the wind that the Granger Way would live on, in every person, in every horse, who found their home in trust, silence, in the gentle power of a second chance. Underscore, 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 underscore. Closing message. Our works morale. You don't need to be loud to be heard. Real power isn't about control. It's about connection. And the wild doesn't always need taming. Sometimes it just needs someone to trust, like if you believe in second chances. Share if you've ever felt seen by an animal. Subscribe for more true stories where silence becomes strength.